Hey ladies, do you ever wake up feeling like you're running on empty? You snap at everybody and you just can't put your finger on why? Well, could it be your hormones on their own journey, wreaking havoc with your emotions and how you feel? Welcome back to Revive and Thrive. In this week's episode, we are going to dive into a topic that so many of us feel, but we hardly ever talk about. We never want to share with others because it feels a little bit maybe like we're complaining. It's about why we feel crummy, why we feel tired, irritable, and just downright off at this time in our life. That life in the middle phase, right? Perimenopause, maybe even menopause. Hormonal balances could be the hidden reason for why you're feeling what you're feeling. So today we're going to break down some signs, some causes, and most importantly, some things that you can do to helpfully change what you're feeling. My name is Darcy Newman. I am the host of this podcast, a retreat leader, which is one of my favorite things to do. We go on unique retreats everywhere. I'm also a coach and a mentor. So the goals for this episode are understanding why women feel what they feel in perimenopause. There's this hair up there that's just kind of flailing around. So I really want to get into what is going on hormonally. I'm not going to go super deep, but when I understood this in perimenopause, my mind was blown. I started to really investigate, really digest what was going on within me hormonally. As I've shared with you in the past, I used to have migraine headaches, plus a plethora of other quite uncomfortable symptoms when I was in perimenopause. And not just physically, they were emotional as well. I fell into this place that was very uncomfortable and really unexpected. Like I had no idea I was going to feel what I was feeling. So I'm going to explain to you what I researched and what I discovered and some things that I did to hopefully help you on this journey if you're in the midst of this. Now, keep in mind that I am now in menopause, and I want to make it really clear that what I experienced in perimenopause is very different than what I'm experiencing now in menopause. Again, symptoms that have surprised me, but definitely more manageable. And I think the fact that I took action when I was in perimenopause, I really feel better or different than I think I would have if I wouldn't have done anything. So let's get into it. Okay, so we're going to start perimenopause, which begins in a woman's life at a very different time. Like some women begin in their 40s, they begin to experience changes. Some don't really experience anything till their mid 40s, maybe even 50s. And again, some women don't experience hardly anything. I've had some people in my family tell me I didn't even know when I went into menopause until I stopped menstruating. Oh my gosh, lucky them in some ways, right? So there is, I think, opportunity in this period of your life. But let's stick to just the hormones right now. So the radical hormonal chaos that is causing some of these experiences or feelings that you're feeling at this time of your life. There is an estrogen and progesterone and testosterone dance going on below the surface. I would like to today, just here at the beginning, just spend a brief time talking about it from my experience of Ayurveda practitioner and a little bit of what I know in Chinese medicine, which is really that, a little bit. I've primarily focused on Ayurveda. So there are two fundamental principles that I think help us understand these hormones, the sex hormones. We're also going to talk about the stress hormones. And when I share this perspective, this Chinese medicine perspective of yin and yang, I think it will help you better understand how the sex hormones and the stress hormones are really working in this balance or this relationship with each other. So here's a brief understanding, and I mean brief, really. So the principle of yang is energizing, activating, motivating principle in our life. We need that principle, right? So when we're very active, energized, there is a reaction to that. And then there's the yin principle or fundamental, and that is nourishing. It's a building principle, which also is really important in our life. Like, really hang on to these two ideas as I talk about what is going on hormonally. These principles are opposite of each other, and we need the opposing principles to understand balance, right? Like what we need to do to balance. Like if we're always in yang and we're overactive, overstimulated, and we never nourish and build, the two will always be at extreme opposites. That's when we really start to experience chaos, hormonal fluctuations, and it is displayed in how we emotionally feel and how we physically feel. So then you could also say, this may help understand as well, that stress hormones have the yang fundamental or principle. Sex hormones have the yin. I think this gets really fascinating. Sex hormones have the yin principle. So stay with me, because this is when I think it gets, like, if you really think about this, you can really gain a lot of understanding about yourself. Okay, so we're going to start with the sex hormones, and we're going to really just stick with the hormones that most women are familiar with. That is estrogen, progesterone. We all have different levels of all of these hormones, and they're always in relationship to each other. During our midlife transition, the women's dominant hormone fluctuations are happening with estrogen and progesterone. And the beautiful thing to remember is these are nourishing and building within us. They have a very yin principle. We need these hormones, right? Okay, so there are more types of estrogen than just estrogen. There's actually 3 or 4. And I think if you were listening to this, probably in Europe, they may call it estradiol. We refer to it in other countries, and we refer to it mostly as estrogen in the US. But they're the same thing. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Progesterone and testosterone serve as precursors of estrogen. That's also kind of important to remember. So let me say it again. Progesterone and testosterone are other hormones that are estrogen precursors. The precursor hormones, progesterone and testosterone, are created in our ovaries, our adrenal glands, in our entire body of fat, muscle, brain, and other tissues. So these just don't live within the female sex hormones. These live in both male and female at different levels in these other areas of our body. I think it is also important to remember that because estrogen lives in other tissues of our body, estrogen is always with us. And there's this myth or this belief sometimes that once you get into menopause, that point at which you stop menstruating and you have stopped or haven't had your period for up to a year, that's menopause, that we stop producing estrogen. And that simply isn't true. The level at which we produce it is different. It isn't completely gone. Okay, so this fact about our sex hormones was absolutely fascinating to me. So here it is. And I may read this just to make sure I get this absolutely correct, because when we understand this, it's going to help us understand how the stress hormones play and dance on our sex hormones. Okay, so progesterone is the yang within the yin of the 2 main hormones, testosterone and estrogen. Progesterone's main function is to keep estrogen in check. I'm going to say that again. Progesterone's main function is to keep estrogen in check. Estrogen always follows progesterone's lead. They're in this dance with each other all the time. Interestingly, our body can make estrogen from progesterone, but it can't make progesterone from estrogen. So progesterone has a lot of responsibility and primarily acts as the balancing force in the dance between estrogen and progesterone. And this is why a lot of women will take a progesterone supplement or put an ointment on their skin and they'll feel better because it starts to interact with the estrogen in their body that is on this wild dance. So I think that's pretty fascinating. Now, in my own personal experience, I did use a progesterone ointment for a while and oils, and I did feel better. But then I started to do a lot of research and I began to wonder if it was actually a good idea to stay on the progesterone, we'll call it supplementation, long term. So I was on it for several years and then I stopped. Okay. So just as estrogen can be made from progesterone, I think this is also very fascinating. So too can the stress hormones like cortisol. Okay. Just as estrogen can be made from progesterone, so too can our stress hormones, which today we're going to talk about cortisol and adrenaline. But cortisol can also be made from progesterone. So just pause for a moment and think about that. So if that's true, what happens when we're always stressed and our cortisol level is always high? Interesting. So think about that. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. It is not that we don't produce enough estrogen. Remember I said it's in all of our tissues, not just in the female sex hormones. So it's not that we don't produce enough estrogen, but there's an insufficient balance of our sex and stress hormones when we are always on empty and our stress levels are high. The cool thing is our body is very intelligent. And our body says, okay, so I'm running on empty here. I can't keep up with the pace of this person's life. So, excuse me. So sometimes I need to tap into other areas of the body, such as our sex hormones, to fuel our fast-paced, highly stressful life, right? So if our adrenaline and our cortisol are always on, it starts to deplete us. So the body says, oh my gosh, I'm starting to run on empty because I'm always using these hormones. I need to, and the level up of them starts to run a little bit low. I need to tap into other things and borrow energy from somewhere else. So it goes to our sex hormones, primarily progesterone. Isn't that fascinating? Okay, so the other component I want to add that I think is like really something to just pause and think about is our life force or vital energy. And these two concepts are the top of discussion in Ayurveda and in Chinese medicine. Chinese medicine refers to our life force energy as our qi, probably heard about that before, and Ayurveda refers to it as our prana. So these energies is our capacity, is our resilience, is our ability to feel like our cup is full and overflowing all the time. Okay. So when we don't feel like our cup is overflowing all the time, and we feel depleted, and we snap at others, and we wake up in the morning, we still feel lousy after maybe even sleeping all night, the thing to look at is how are we depleting our qi, or our prana, our vital force energy in life. You can start to see this in yourself and other people. So really start to observe that in yourself when you feel the things I spoke of at the very beginning of this podcast, because there are signs that you are tapping into your reserves. Stay with me now. This gets really fascinating. Okay, I just had another bit I was going to share about yin and yang and hopefully make this a little bit easier to understand. So I spoke of earlier that yin is nourishing and balancing or building, and the yang is our energy, right? Is the active part of us. So here's an analogy that may help understand the two if this is the first time you've heard about them. So you could think of yin as the ocean. So imagine you're standing and you're watching the ocean. The water of the ocean is very nourishing, right? Very soothing, very calming. The yang are the waves. When the yang really turns into a hurricane, for example, or not even to that point, it becomes turbulent. We have a greater amount of yang than we do yin. It's moving the yin in us with a great capacity. It's out of balance. This next statement is from my Ayurvedic background, and Ayurveda speaks to this all the time. They also speak to our prana in terms of our digestion. Like the number one thing that Ayurveda focuses on is how we digest our food and how we digest our emotions. And when our prana or our chi is out of balance and it's ignored, so we can recognize that we don't feel like we're in balance and just carry on and never change anything. And our body can tolerate that for a while. But after a period of time, the yin or the nourishing qualities, because the yang, the active qualities in us, are starting to be more prominent and out of balance. The yin or the nourishing qualities no longer can do their job of soothing us, nourishing us, and calming us because our yang is too strong. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever noticed that in somebody? Okay, do you recall me earlier saying that our sex hormones are the nourishing hormones within us and they have yin qualities? Well, now let's talk about our stress hormones. The two main that we're going to speak about are adrenaline and cortisol, and they have yang qualities. So active, right? These two hormones are active when we're stressed and particularly active when we're in a state of fight or flight, right? So adrenaline is there. We access it when we feel threatened, like we're going to be hit by a truck, something like that. So we want these hormones, like we've been given them for a very good reason. We hit the brakes because a truck is about to hit us. Our adrenaline kicks in, so does our cortisol, and we stop. The truck doesn't hit us. It goes by and we go on with our life. Now, the cool thing is adrenaline, eventually, the level of it eventually drops down. However, our level of cortisol sticks in our system. It hangs around for a lot longer period of time. This is important to remember. So if that is true and we are constantly on the go and under stress and really ignoring these imbalances within us, like the things I spoke of at the very beginning of the podcast, we're ignoring our inability to sleep or stay asleep, our emotional reactions, what we're feeling physically. Now, I think what happens a lot of the time, because we're so conditioned to believe that, oh my gosh, this is what I'm feeling, there must be some pharmaceutical thing that we can do. Yes, there are hormonal replacements that have been an idea for a long time, right? And we have found that a lot of times, or at least in the past, that they cause more problems than they solve in the long run. Now, I do believe that that is changing, and it is something for you to consider. But here's the thing. If we rely on pharmaceutical intervention, and that covers the problems so that we can continue the life that we're living, and we're not willing to make other changes, then what are the long-term effects of that? Are we really solving our problems? Or are we just receiving instant gratification like everything else we want? So I'm not negating, and I have maybe a little judgment around pharmaceutical intervention at this time in our life. And I think, sometimes I should have maybe done that because it was my physical symptoms were just incredible, but I just refused to cover what I wasn't willing to look at. And so I went down the path of personal development and spiritual development instead. And I think it's made all the difference in my life in how I feel right now. So it was painful in the moment at that time in my life, but it was also a wake-up call. And it's like the thing I keep saying about midlife. It is an awakening. It is a wake-up call for you to really look at your life, especially if you're experiencing an astronomical amount of symptoms. And that's not just the physical symptoms. It's the emotions as well. So the midlife crisis that people talk about is a result of something your deepest part of yourself, your soul, yourself is trying to tell you. And covering it up, I think, leads to more stress, and it leads to a less joyful life in the middle. Okay, so here's what else I mean about that. So let's say that you're feeling a lot, you're on the roller coaster ride and you're feeling tumultuous and you're trying to decide what to do. You have a busy life. Maybe you still have children at home. You have a career. You have a demanding life. You have a lot going on. You're running in all different directions. You fall into bed at night, yet you can't sleep all night. Okay, so there's a lot of cues or a lot of signs trying to get your attention. So these high stress hormones, remember I said adrenaline and cortisol go up in high stress moments. Adrenaline eventually goes down. Cortisol doesn't. It sticks around in your body for a while. And if it doesn't ever get a chance to regenerate or come back to normal, what it starts to do is deplete our progesterone level because it continues to borrow progesterone from us. So it taps into our nourishing, building qualities just so that we can survive and maintain the high stress that we're in, that we have created. We create all of that. We decide. Now, I am not saying that you shouldn't have children, for sure. Oh my God, they're the most amazing thing in the world, right? But what I am saying is if this is you, don't ignore it. Like, this is you. This is you trying to tell you something is really happening within you. And to cover it up and ignore it literally interferes with your ability to cope with life. And if that's maintained, here's what's going on. I've probably made it like abundantly clear, and I don't want to just hammer down on this idea, but chronic high levels of cortisol, and even let me put it a different way. So we can have a stressful life and we think, well, maybe I need more sleep, which is true, right? It is. But sleep alone, especially if you're unable to get really good sleep and you continue the same lifestyle, so your cortisol level might go down a little bit, but it doesn't ever get a chance to completely reset. And then we use something to cover up the effects that we're having, but we don't change our lifestyle. We don't change our diet. We continue to live a high stressful life. So we continue to deplete that prana or that chi within us, that vitality, that robust energy within us. Not negative, but like what holds us, that part of us that feels alive, full of life, not over-energized, not overdoing, but our cup feels full all the time, even when we're stressed, right? So when we're in balance, when we're checking our stress and we're attending to it, again, I want to make it really clear that I'm not saying you should never be in stress, but it's what we do with our stress and how we attend to it that matters in terms of how much it borrows from other areas of our body. This becomes really important if we continue to maintain long-term dominance of cortisol. Okay, so I also want to make it clear that we need all of these hormones. It's just the balance of them that makes the difference. And again, if cortisol is always in excess, it starts to tap into our ability to sleep and rest deeply. It taps into or starts the process of osteoporosis because it starts to go deep into the body, in the bones, and access anything it can. Like the intelligence of our body is always working for us, but it's also always giving us signs. So this is going to be a point of view of mine that I'm just really strongly believe in. Our cortisol levels are always tapping into our sex hormones. What fills the sex hormones? Well, the sex hormones starts to tap into the tissues of the body. And this is what starts osteoporosis in women, heart disease in women, overweight in women. It plays a role in how we fight infection. It plays a role on our emotions, depression, sadness. The robust for life starts to deplete. There's a lot of research out there about the effects of cortisol and depression. It's huge. So I would like to drive home another reality about living a really stressful life unchecked. I mentioned earlier that cortisol stays in the bloodstream for a lot longer period of time, and eventually we become oversensitized or more sensitive to stressful events, right? Because the cortisol level stays really high in our bodies. So eventually what happens is even small stressors like being late for work or being irritable because the train has stopped you from going where you want to go. I mean, little things that when we are in balance, does it make sense? If we are in balance, our hormones are in check, we're taking really good, nourishing care of ourselves. A train in the way of being late isn't as big a deal. It just isn't. You just don't get as overexcited about it. But we start to develop this hormonal resistance that I said leads to other health problems. And the other one I didn't mention that's really big for women in menopause is thyroid resistance. A lot of women end up going on medications because the nourishing qualities that the cortisol have accessed are no longer available because we started to deplete them. So we start to tap into our bones and our muscle tissue and even our brain, that whole foggy thing. This is like so amazing because we can really do something about this. We have control if we pay attention. Night sweats, hot flashes, all of those symptoms. Heavy bleeding. This is like a confession for me because I had so many, I never really had night sweats and I really don't get hot flashes, but I had a whole bunch of other symptoms like heavy bleeding and disruptive sleep. This is all linked to cortisol decreasing, progesterone, tapping into estrogen, and tapping into the deeper tissues in our body. It's a depletion of them. The emotional highs and lows, this dance that progesterone and estrogen play, and they're always sort of chasing something, starts to tap into our brain chemistry. So that brain fog. So next I would like to talk about some of the systemic and social factors. There is a big demand on us in today's high stress world. Even having one child and going to all the activities he wanted to be involved in. And, the hard part is I wanted him to experience, and I think you might feel this as well. We want our children to experience a lot of things, maybe a lot of activities. Maybe they want to be in a lot of sports or they want to be in a lot of other activities. We want them to experience these things in life because life has all these gifts to offer us. I decided to stay home and raise him in that very busy time. I left my nursing career because my husband's career was just way too demanding. And I just decided that instead of trying to juggle all of that based on what I was feeling, that I needed to give something up so that I could take care of myself. The other thing to keep in mind is when we are over there all the time in these high stress, busy lives, We also start to not give attention to things like exercise and diet. We start to ignore those things. They end up on the back burner. So we start to live more of a sedentary life, or we have poor dietary habits. And because our life is fast paced, we purchase products and touch things that have this endocrine disrupting chemicals in them. So a lot of plastics, a lot of cosmetics have those kinds of things in them. Cleaning products. I stopped buying cleaning products 100% because I make my own. I have tried to do, everything I can to not touch endocrine disrupting products. And I would encourage you to really think about that. What kind of cleaning products do you bring into your house? How many plastics that you consume food out of that contain all these microplastics in them? Now, on a day-to-day basis, we might not think much about that, but you do that over a period of time and it matters. Okay. The other thing that I think is kind of a big deal, and I felt this when I was in perimenopause into menopause, was a lack of awareness and support. Like, I didn't feel any support. I was around a lot of younger people, which was fine. I mean, I have a lot of great friends that are a lot younger than me, but it was difficult for me to share what I was experiencing because they weren't in that phase of their life. They were so far removed from it. They weren't even close to that phase of their life. So I felt isolated and I felt like I didn't have a lot of support. And when I would speak about it to other women who were close to my age, they would sort of brush it off, or they complained a lot. And that's not my thing. It's complaining about what's going on. My thing is to take action and do something about it. I think complaining is us ignoring what we don't want to pay attention to. So we project it out to the world thinking that that is somehow going to help us. Complaining, when you find yourself doing that, that is a very clear sign that you're unwilling to look at something underneath the surface. And you probably know that. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about society's unacceptance of aging. When I started to realize I was in this new phase in my life, I didn't realize that I felt the way I did about aging until I was like in the heat of it. I had a really difficult time accepting that part of myself. But when I decided to accept my aging and the experiences of aging, my life changed. I really had to do some deep, deep emotional and personal and spiritual development because I was carrying around these limiting beliefs. Like, I had a large backpack on my back of limiting beliefs. And until I was willing to one by one disable them, I had a really difficult time accepting that I was aging. So with all of this information, what do we do about it? Some of this is not going to be new news to you. So number one is to listen to your body. Practice caring about what you're feeling instead of running for the medicine cabinet all of the time. Practice feeling and paying attention to what you're feeling instead of trying to cover it up all the time. Hormone replacement therapy may be something that you want to look into. I would do a lot of research. I would ask a lot of questions. I believe that it's changed, but I can't tell you much about it. I don't really have an interest in it, but I don't judge women who decide they want to go down that path. I think what's also very important is that you consider also paying attention to the information that I just gave you earlier about all the hormonal things that are going on. Okay, there are also non-pharmaceutical supplementation and herbs that are very helpful. And honestly, this is what started my journey down herbalism. My deep interest in it started when I was in perimenopause because I was unwilling to do the pharmaceutical route. So I went the herbalist route. So just know that that is an option, and we're going to be talking about that in some of my other podcasts. Diet is something else I'm super, super interested in. And I don't think anything here I'm going to say is new news, except maybe this. I did in my perimenopausal phase, focus more on changing my diet. I was already a vegetarian, and I really tried to take in just an organic vegetable diet. I did 100%. Difficult to get 100% here where I live, but I really focused on that. But here's the other thing I want to say, because you already know all of that, right? Increase your protein a little bit, but don't go crazy. Like, don't overconsume red meat to increase your protein. There's so many other ways to increase our protein. Again, we're going to talk about that in some later episodes, but focus on an anti-inflammatory diet, which is the other thing we are going to talk about in February. Exercise, please, 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 please start to exercise. Start slow. You don't need to do it all tomorrow. Pay attention to how you feel. Yoga, strength training, love, love, love strength training. Just watch how much you do and how fast, because I found that I had to back off of my strength training routine at that stage of my life because my body hurt all the time, and it hurt even worse when I lifted hard. So light strength training, yoga, Pilates, I think are great. They help stabilize your mood, they boost your energy, and they really help with your cortisol levels. They are another thing that nurtures our body so that our cortisol level can start to drop and stop depleting ourselves. Sleep. Sleep, sleep, sleep. The number one thing you hear about night sweats and unable to sleep for women, actually in the whole phase of midlife. I hear about this all the time. I have family members who talk about it all the time. They can't sleep. They wake up in the middle of the night. They can't either get to sleep, they wake up in the middle of the night, and they can't stay asleep. Creating a sleep routine, another thing we're going to talk about in February, is profound. Profound. I'm going to leave the routine and what that looks like for that podcast. So come back, because I have lots of great ideas that help with your bedtime sleep routine. Have to make lifestyle adjustments. It is a calling to change lifestyle at this time in your life. Decrease caffeine, decrease or stop alcohol. Okay, so the other thing is stress management, right? Maybe having a meditation routine or yoga nidra. I've spoke about that. Again, these are going to come up in February. I'm going to do a whole short podcast on yoga nidra, because yoga nidra shows up in all of my retreats, because I lead retreats for women and their midlife range. And yoga nidra is profound at this time in your life. I did it almost daily when I was in the hottest part of my shift. And it was incredible. I can't say it enough. And there's also shamanic journeying that I think is also very, very powerful. And again, it's something else I do in my retreats and I do on my own. And I think these things have been incredible in my life, and I love to share them with others, and hopefully it helps with them. There's also pranayama, which is deep, deep breathing. Take a day and just notice your breath. Every couple hours, notice how you're breathing. Be amazed on how often you take short little breaths. And when you notice it, take a slow, deep breath. Also very good for lowering your cortisol level. Journaling is another thing that I would highly encourage. Another thing we do at my retreats. I just love to journal. I have journals everywhere, and lots of tips for journaling for you. I pretty much share those at my retreats. So I know I'm putting a big plug in for my retreats here. And I'm going to put a link below to my blog that I've started about my retreats and the women that they are for and the things that we do. Now, I just started it, and my next blog is going to be on retreating at unique locations. That's kind of my thing. Like, Like if you want to go to Costa Rica, there's a lot of unique places that we can go. And that is my passion, is to be not just in an Airbnb somewhere on the ocean, but to be in a really unique place like a treehouse. So I will put a link to my newsletter so that you get in on all of this, and then a link to my blog about that. So this is where I'm going to end this podcast. I want to thank you for getting all the way to the end, and I hope it was insightful. I hope you learned something new about yourself, and maybe you're ready to start changing some things in your life that will actually nourish you. So I welcome comments, questions below. I also leave an email if you would like to email me and ask me a question. That we experience is because of all of that I spoke of earlier. It influences our serotonin. It influences our dopamine. So I think what's incredible is how intelligent our body is in helping us survive. But what's really sad is that we might not be willing to change our life enough to possibly prevent some of the main diseases that women experience in menopause, bubbling under the surface, that are asking for your attention. And I would encourage you to look at those because they also affect your cortisol, your progesterone, your estrogen levels. Okay. We're not just physical beings. There's a lot more to us than that. So thank you for staying to the end, and please subscribe. Ask me questions or leave comments below. I look forward to them, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.